Hello and welcome, hello to the person waving intently. Welcome to Surrey Decides again. We're deciding on something slightly differently this time. Instead of voting for people, despite the fact you'll be faced by two people in a second, we are voting on yes or no to the question. Can someone tell me the exact wording of the question so I don't get it wrong?
Should the University of Surrey Students' Union continue to affiliate to the National Union of Students?
That question. So if you didn't hear it at home, it's basically, should we be members of the NUS? Should we continue to affiliate to the NUS? That's the question. It's up to Surrey to decide. We're here this evening, hopefully, to debate each side of that question. And for that purpose, we have a delegate from the yes team and the no team. I have to emphasize you're not voting for or against these people. You're only voting for yes or no. Of course, you can abstain from voting, but presumably because you're here, you want to engage with the democratic process. So if I can just welcome the delegates for the positions yes and no. And everyone give a round of applause. Thank you. So you sitting under the... Just got to check, because that can be confusing. Hopefully everyone appreciates the high-tech nature of this evening. We've got a phone on a tripod. We do also have an actual webcam. And we've gone back to the chalkboard. So, first of all, we're going to have a short introduction, if that's okay, from the two, I don't know what to call you really, not really delegates, are you? Leaders, campaign leaders, there you go, the two campaign leaders. That term will probably change throughout the evening, as it has already. So we'll start off with yes, so with the status quo.
Yeah. Well, this argument is towards two things really. There's been a lot of conversation in the last few weeks about the NUS and about the running of the NUS conferences, as well as what the use of the NUS is really in terms of the affiliation cost and what we pay to what we get. For starters, the NUS is a 90-year-old institution that, though it's not void of problems, it does provide a valuable service to Students' Union and students. In this statement, I will address the two things that I mentioned. First of all, the fact that the only thing that the NUS is good for is the NUS Extra Card, is the argument that's been said. And there are free, and though I'm not going to sit here and say that the NUS Extra Card isn't a big bonus, it is. It creates every NUS Extra Card that is sold, the union gets £4.71 for every card, which means that I could theoretically make up the affiliation fees in card costs alone. And the average student with a card saves £128 a year. But I don't think that this debate should just be economics. I think it should also be about what the students get out of it. And within this, there's three things. First of all, there's the representation on a national level. Nationally, the NUS does represent us. They have, in the past 2 years, campaigned for the Office of Fair Trade and to look into hidden course costs, which they've tried to abolish, because that was the issue. It's particularly in Scottish universities, but also within the English universities. And there is also the fact that representation on a national level ensures that there is a higher level to the Students' Union. And though it might not happen at this current moment, in the future, if the Student Union is not a reliable source and if it is corrupt, then if we disaffiliate, there is no governing thing that allows us to go against that or allows us to have any power over how the union would be run, making it really difficult to say that that students would be represented and students' views would be heard. Secondly, there's the issue of equal opportunities. The NUS has liberation groups, which have been a course of conversation in the last few weeks. But they have also got really important campaigns in these liberation groups. Whether they should be particular safe spaces is another argument, but they've got their campaign for I Heart Consent, which ran from 2014 to 2015 to this year, and that's teaching about consent and teaching about how important consent is. It works through workshops in universities. This is something that Surrey isn't signed up for, but could potentially in the future be signed up for, and it could potentially be very, very vital to the education of our students. The second particular campaign for the NUS, though there are many, is Disabled Students Allowance, mainly because it happened in the last 6-8 months. The Disabled Students Allowance, the NUS managed to block them as they... not block the Students Allowance, sorry. They managed to block the cuts from the Conservative coalition government, as it was at the time, because there were cuts to the Disabled Students Allowance, which a third of students receive. And there were proposed cuts, before Matt Sadler's goes on at me, there were proposed cuts to the students and Disabled Students Allowance, and just carry on. And which a third of students receive, and the NUS worked to block those. Also, there's the campaigns for postgraduate funding, as well as the campaign 20 years ago for council tax exemption, which they have continued to campaign to maintain that.
Can you just wrap up?
Yeah. The final thing is sustainability. Student eats. That's a really key thing for Garden Society, which will be really badly affected. And the final point I want to make is about the corruption of the NUS, or the perceived corruption of the NUS, which basically says that the NUS doesn't work as it should do, it's not as representative as it should be. And my argument for this is that the NUS, I'm not going to deny that might in part be the case, but I think we should work to change that, and we should work to make that better instead of just leaving everyone else to put up with it. And we will lack our national representation through doing that, and then perhaps go back in a few years when everything's sorted, but other people have had to clear up for us. So I think we should work with other universities to make that better and to actually force change instead of just leaving and forgetting about it.
Okay, thank you very much to Kate for the yes. We're going to hear the statement from the no campaign next. If the statement can just stay with the case for no, and then there'll be an opportunity to respond to any point, so everyone has a fair opportunity there. So that's your turn now.
Okay. Hello, everyone. When I approach students and ask them what the NUS do, I always get a look of confusion from people, and they clam up and they look like they feel like they should know what the NUS does, but they don't know. Most people just tell me it's a discount card. And so what the NUS is supposed to be, a body for democracy. It's meant to be a national platform for students across the country, and it's meant to come together to bring about productive change for the benefit of students. However, what the NUS does in practice is another matter completely. Their conferences have been said to be intimidating, the rules on who can attend them discriminatory, and their culture is non-inclusive. If we bring it down to the Surrey students, our voices and our opinions, they don't care about us. Their services don't benefit us, and their barriers to engage with them are very, very high. I believe we should vote no to the NUS because of the way it operates, because it's not relevant to Surrey students, and because I believe our union and student body would be better without it. We could work to try and reform the union, but that would take away our focus from our own students, and do we really want to be doing that?
Thank you. Round of applause for yes or no. Would you like a chance to respond? I'm going to give the campaign leaders an opportunity to respond to each other now. So if you'd like to respond, you can just, if you can sort of round it into one response and one load of questions, then we'll go over to no, and then we'll take some questions from everyone here.
The claim that the practices are intimidating and non-exclusive and discriminatory, I believe this, you can confirm this or deny this, I believe that's in the fact that that the roles or the officers for the conferences, are very much you can, for a disabled conference, you can only be disabled. So it's very inclusive in that way. But I would argue that this comes down to whether it should be a safe space or not. In terms of women's conferences, a lot of the reasons that there are restrictions for men to attend is because historically there have been panels for women that have been full of white cis men, and that does not encourage any union within women, and it does not encourage any progress or change. And what I would say is that doesn't mean that is particularly completely correct, and there should be some sort of middle ground where there's some sort of safe space, and then moves over to something that is more inclusive and actually gets people talking together. And you say that just working on the union and working on the NUS distracts from the students. Well, the thing is, if without the NUS, the union would have no national representation, so the union would have to try and be aware of national issues, which would distract from the students. They would have to plan their own training events, and they would have to, outsource things in a different way or do it internally, which would distract anyway. So I don't see how that would be progressive or helpful.
Okay, and then an opportunity you can respond to those questions and pose any questions yourself.
Okay, so the first thing you mentioned was safe spaces, and this is in regards to minority groups that have their conferences and feel like these communities need to come together and speak with people who understand what they're feeling in a space where they don't feel threatened. And I completely agree with the premise of having a safe space. I think it's very important for communities to be able to gather together and discuss their own issues. However, you cannot bring about any meaningful change if you don't involve other people. So to give an example, in the Black Students' Conference that happened recently, white people were called parasites. And what I'm trying to get at here is, if you have a conference where you're trying to bring about equality, you're trying to break down barriers, then why is it right to exclude the people who can help you bring that equality? And this kind of leads on to what you mentioned about our union wanting to represent itself on the national stage. The fact is that it's very difficult for us to represent ourselves when we're not being allowed to participate. So, for instance, last year, Tom Windybank, our VP Welfare, he wanted to go to the disability conference and he couldn't because he wasn't disabled. Yet we have elected him as our chosen representative of disabled students, of all our students. So why do they dictate to us who we can and cannot send if we have deemed that someone is capable of representing those people? The other point you mentioned was about moving away our focus to national issues rather than our own union. And the reason I brought this up is because the sabbatical offers that we have a very, very busy year when they come in here. And they have very limited time, very limited resources. And the thing is, if we don't focus on our own students, then what use is a students' union?
Okay, I think there's a lot of rhetorical questions in your statement, so I think that's a response, and I think I'm going to leave it there for the initial statements, if everyone's happy with that. Okay, do we have any questions from anyone here? And just giving everyone an opportunity to stretch out and decide so I can get an idea of how many there are. Okay, I think you had your hand up first.
You say for the campaign that we're not affiliated with, but we could, the one about teaching consent. I support that campaign, but the issue which I'm wondering is that why do we need exactly a NUS affiliation in order to do that? Surely we can just do our own independent campaigns if we so wish. And that's the question I want to pose to you.
Okay, so I'll repeat that for anyone who's tuning in at home. If in order to fulfill campaigns, in order to actively engage with these campaigns, why does it have to only be on an NUS platform? Why can't it be done locally, basically, I think is the question.
Okay. I don't think it does have to only be on a national platform for starters. It can be on a local platform, and it has been. Feminist Society have done stuff, and maybe not so much stuff on consent, but they have tried to do stuff this year surrounding that matter, and are going to try and do stuff next year. But the thing is, national stuff brings people together. So if we're going to take the campaign for consent, for example, you've got universities from all around the country that it enables communication and enables conversation between those universities. So it's not just an individual group on their own trying to push something, which is in its essence a change in attitudes, which is very difficult. It's actually something that's much easier on a national level as well as a local level, and it's much easier to have that support of the NUS and have support of organisations instead of just doing it as an individual, because that also relies on individuals being interested to push through and to put their time into it, and that's not always necessarily the case.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Your hand straight up.
Okay, one for the No campaign.
Thank you.
If we leave the NUS, we get rid of our national representation. After that, what should we do as a union to have national representation? Because we're essentially voting to get rid of it. So what do you propose as an alternative to the NUS to have Surrey represented nationally?
So what does the No campaign propose as an alternative to the NUS to ensure that Surrey is represented nationally?
Well, I want to start out with saying that the NUS is already not representative of our views, because, as I mentioned previously, if we're not allowed to attend some of their conferences, then they're discriminating against us. Sorry, what was your question about? What's the alternative to the NUS?
Yeah, what's your proposal to ensure that Surrey students are represented nationally if we were to disaffiliate from the NUS? You might not have thought one yet, don't worry. If you haven't, then you can say that. Don't want to put you on the spot too much,
well,
maybe you can come back.
I guess what I said when I first answered the question is that at the moment we're not being represented anyway, being within the NUS. Because, and a previous point from one of the No campaigns that we've had before is that it's simply the voice of a very small group of Labour Party activists and left-wing students, and that's unrepresentative, undemocratic, partisan and irrelevant. And also I want to point out that we've had these discussions again and again and again, and every few years people bring up the same points of the issues that they have with the NUS. The fact that we're not represented, the fact that they seem to fight discrimination with discrimination.
So in effect, if I'm right, your response for the benefit of some of the puzzle faces is that we're not represented nationally as it is, right?
Yes.
So therefore there's no difference if we disaffiliate. So although it's not a direct answer to how we'll ensure representation, what you're saying is basically it won't make a difference to our national representation. Is that your response?
And I also want to add that it's not for lack of want of trying either.
Okay, sure. Any other? You've had your hand up desperately for a while.
Yeah, on this point, sort of to give a balanced view, there's arguments to say that there's a small minority of students within the NUS that really drive what they politically believe, and national conference and liberation groups, which a lot of people don't really associate with. And so the argument is that they don't really provide our views nationally anyway. The argument for yes, which is what you've said, is that the national issues, the funding, the postgraduate funding, the council tax, things like that, are things that only happened and only came about because the NUS was a thing. And if we disaffiliate, then it actually smallens the group of people who can actually make a difference within the NUS.
Do you have a question?
It was a point.
All right. I'm only saying that because anyone who's watching online, which there are people watching online, they wouldn't have picked that up. So if we can just stick to questions for now. I'm sure we've got time for some comments later on. You've been trying to ask a question for a long time.
So one of the points that was made was that because you mentioned Tom Windback couldn't go to a conference because he didn't associate himself as disabled, then that meant we weren't represented. But I believe it's not. And you also said that the SABs have they're very busy and they should focus on stuff for Surrey students. I don't believe the University of Surrey Students' Union's connection with the NUS has to be done through our elected officers or has to be done through SABs. Like the NUS delegates don't have to be on exec; they can be a complete separate group of people. And I believe any student could go to any of these conferences and try and make a difference. It doesn't have to be them. So
what's your question just on that point?
Do you think that's true? Because that seems to be, you seem to think that only SABs could do it, and that seems to be contradictory.
So a question on your statement, whether you think the only way that students can be represented is by the elected officers.
No, so I don't think that's the case. I think the case is that so no one's come forward, no student has come forward and said, I want to represent our union. And also the whole point of what I mentioned about the sabbatical officers is that they are there to represent the views of all of our students. They have been chosen to do that. And if a student wants to go and speak at the conference, of course they can. But it seems to me that not many students have come forward and done that.
It is true we haven't had very many delegates for NUS conference. Just to give a bit of information behind there, I think over the last 2 years of those who ran for NUS conference, I think it's fair to say fewer than a handful were unsuccessful as a statistic to show that students who want to be involved generally have been involved. It's also worth noting on the other side, on the other hand, that the two campaign leaders sitting here today are neither of you is an elected officer, right, in terms of the union. So we do have some representation of Surrey students here in that sense, if you like. So just for a bit of context,
So you said about the NUS having, so this is a question at both of you. You said about the NUS having sort of these resources, and I do agree with that because I'm sort of the international person at the union, yeah. And before I came to the role, I actually went on the NUS website and looked at all of the stuff they have for international students, and it actually does have quite a lot of information out there. And as it's between other universities, you get to see what's worked well, what hasn't worked well, what you can implement here. But so when you talk about NUS and what it can offer us, I don't see it as a disadvantage. What I see almost this about is, are the students interested enough to look into the NUS to find these benefits? So the question I'd pose to both of you is, do you think there exists enough interest on campus to sort of warrant paying that much money for an NUS membership?
Okay, do you think there exists enough interest among the general student populace, those who are on campus and those who are off campus, to warrant the fee, basically?
Yeah.
Which is a separate point to the one you're starting with about training as an officer.
I always said that there are resources.
I understand the question, but I don't see the link to the statement.
Do you want me to explain the link?
No, that's fine. So that's the question. So do you think it's value for money, basically? Do you think that the students think it is? And you are both students and you're representative students, right? So we'll start off with no this time.
So your question was, are students interested in engaging with the NUS?
Yes.
Okay, so...
No, the question was...
No, it wasn't.
I changed.
So I better clarify the question. The question was... well, it was your question. I think whether there is enough student interest at the University of Surrey to warrant the payment.
Fees, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Well, I'll start off with the fact that less than 13% of our students actually own an NUS Extra card. I'd then also like you to look around you in this room and count how many people are in this room. And there's not many people. That's kind of my answer.
Okay, what's your answer?
For starters, as a little response to that, it is in the middle of exams. I just want to put that out there. That is something to bear in mind, that could be why there's not as many people as there should be. But in terms of the question, which was, is there enough student interest? But the way I took it was more in terms of representation and more in terms of like the issues of like with international students and stuff. Is how I took it. But that's like you look like you disagree. Okay. But in terms of that, I think there is a slight issue with engagement. I'm not going to lie, but I do think that it is an important thing. For example, certain societies that focus on sort of liberation group kind of issues do have lots of members. I don't want to mention it all the time, but Feminist Society has around 300 members on a Facebook group. There is an interest in that sort of thing. LGBT plus is a functioning society that has a fair few members, and there is campaigns around that. So there are people interested. As it was mentioned, neither of us are elected officers, and we've all both done stuff within the union. And
can I chip in there?
That's right.
It's okay. It's an interesting point, but to link to the question, do you think therefore that it's worth the money given that you have such activity on campus already locally?
I think it is worth the money because I think there is a necessity for national representation, and I think it's worth the money in terms, if we're going sort of the economic route of NUS card. As I say, it's worth the money because we still, though only 13% of students have an NUS card, this year alone, up until April, we made just under £10,000 on NUS cards, the union. And the union has made, according to the NUS, through trading and cards, the union has made 55 grand through the NUS. So I think in terms of economics, it is worth it.
So 55 grand over how?
Can someone from the finance committee, of whom there are 5 members present, tell me whether the facts are right?
NUS cards to the union was about 8,170.
So that was the sales of cards, right?
So we get £4.70 on every NUS card that's sold. The NUS gets £3.41. So I suppose the figure I was given when I was talking to the NUS. In regards to the 55 grand, is that over a course of a number of years or over a course of 1 year? And then can you compare that please to the amount of affiliations? Obviously we pay £36,000 a year. So
Okay, so we got a specific question here on the saving which is made as a result of being a member. Around £8,000, £9,000 directly from sales of the 13% of student population at Surrey of the extra cards, and then this other figure you're talking about. So if you just clarify that figure for everyone.
As I mentioned in my answer, that figure is from the NUS, the National Students Union, the National Union of Students. It was in terms of both cards and in terms of trading. So in terms of the licensed goods and retail goods that they receive through the NUS.
So it's the amount saved as a result. So it's not the amount made; it's the amount saved.
Well,
is that right?
The figure I got given was through trading, and this was the out figure compared to the 36 grand that we spent on affiliation. If you want confirmation of that, the new president of the NUS will be in the union tomorrow.
I'd actually like confirmation from the entire finance voting committee, which is here tonight.
Just to remember, of course, that the £8,000 that we raise from cards isn't from that £36,000 fee.
No.
It's from the £10.
So can some of you clarify on the saving as a result? Because we clearly don't have. You're all frowning while.
From trading, part of the trading arm, we were told it was about £10,000 this year so far.
Okay, so basically, suffice to say, there's a dispute about how much this is worth, and the members of the finance committee admit, it seems, unless you want to jump in, that there's a dispute here. That's the figure that is being thrown around. Okay. Sorry, thanks very much. Question over here.
Sorry, it's more of a comment on the fact that in terms of sales of NUS cards, we have the NUS logo printed on our students' card. So
this is the NUS extra card that they're talking about with different discounts, right?
So people are buying the NUS extra card to get the discounts.
Yeah.
However, often the logo on our student cards is enough to get the discount.
Okay, so good point. So we have 2 different cards here, right? A lot of students probably don't actually know what the NUS extra card is, or if they do, they might have had it for 1 year and decided it was pointless, or they might just never have bought it for other reasons. The question or the statement that's posed here was that we have the logo of the NUS at the moment. We wouldn't have it if we disaffiliated, but we do at the moment have the logo on the student card, and therefore why is there any incentive to buy an extra card? That does, however, beg the question of, if we were to leave, and this is a question I'm going to ask to Yes, and I'm going to come back to you later. If we were to disaffiliate from the NUS and the University of Surrey library cards, URN cards, student cards, whatever they are, no longer had the NUS logo, but it just had the union logo, which is what would happen, I assume, is it not the case that most businesses would accept that as proof of studentship anyway, and would accept that actually you're a student, therefore you have a student discount? It's a rhetorical question because I don't know the answer, but it's a question I'm going to ask you about whether you'd like to postulate. You're shaking your head, others are nodding their heads, because it's completely subjective, and there will be some employees who will give a student discount on the basis of just being a student. So I'd like to know
This
what you
is
think
going to be
about
a
that.
more personal question, because as somebody who's tried that, it doesn't usually work. But it does depend on the shop. I know for a fact Superdrug, which is one of the stores that cannot be used through other products like Uni Days, that's only an NUS discount store, and you cannot just have a student card for that. You need to have your NUS number, and a lot of places do write down the number. So that is my answer to that. It does depend on the store. For that.
Okay, it depends. Just because you're raring to ask this question, go for it. It is a question though, I hope.
Further on the second part of my
All right,
original
go for it.
was that it's usually the NUS part that's printed on the student card that gets you the discount, not always just the student part. And then the second part of my question was, if we were to disaffiliate with the NUS, how much would it cost to reprint all of our student cards?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Neither of these candidates, I don't think, has the answer to that. If you do, please interrupt me. But
Would it cost to students?
it's an very interesting question. The question is, how much would it cost, or rather broadly, surely it would cost a lot, to reissue student cards without the logo on? It's a very practical question, but it's a very good point, because it would be expensive if it were to reprint. Did someone say 36 grand? I don't think it would be 36 grand. It's a nice point there. You've already asked a lot of questions. A bit.
At the moment,
Then I'm coming. Yeah.
At the moment, we buy things through the NUS's trading consortium. Has anyone worked out the shortfall if we leave? How much extra money it will cost to buy things without using that, or have we tried?
I'm just interrupting you because someone wants to answer it here. These are the people going to answer these questions. So have either of you worked out the shortfall which would result if we weren't to be members of NUS, the trading consortium?
I haven't, but there was a report, a financially audited exercise, I should say, in Southampton in 2012, as they had a referendum then, because they disaffiliated in 2002, and there was a report, and line by line, so their services to Southampton services, just purely sort of the trading services, without discounts that other unions get, there was Southampton services were £2,803 more expensive.
Okay, I'll stop you there just because that's a nice square answer. Do you have any responses to that question?
Well, I don't know a lot about all of the union finances, but I know that we got £10,000 of free stock as a result of this discount, and then we pay them $36,000 as their affiliation fee.
Okay.
Well, we pay them $36,996.15, I think.
Yeah, which is an amount which is funded by the university as part of the union's subvention, and which would be removed from union funding potentially. We have some questions online.
We have quite a few people watching and hopefully listening.
I hope so.
And we have a question from Meerkat. It's a point actually. The card with the NUS logo also means that we can go to other uni events as non-guests. And then
When you say a question from Meerkat,
we're streaming on 2 platforms.
oh, you mean the platform Meerkat? Okay, I understand. I was imagining that Alexander Meerkat. whatever his name is.
So what's Twitter saying? Twitter's saying, please ask the No Camp where the money saved from NUS would go. I don't want to see more money pushed from societies to sport.
Okay, Okay, I'll ask the first part of that question.
Do we need to be represented nationally? Question mark. I'll just throw all these out. Am I the only one who's reminded of Brexit with this no campaign? It doesn't work as well as it should, so let's leave. How easy is it actually to go to an NUS conference and have your voice heard? Lots of questions about the affiliation fee. A point that you apparently look a bit sad. So
that's just my general disposition.
You're saying all this about trade with the NUS, but what have they done to stop the closure of the Shanies and the Union Shop?
I don't think so. We won't go with that one. Okay, so
there are the points so far.
I'm no longer looking sad because we've got some wonderful questions. Thank you very much. Okay, so no. First of all, where's all the money going to go if we leave? What's that going to go to?
So as you mentioned, the 36 grand is part of the subvention that's given to us by the university. So that means if we're saying, okay, look, we're not going to ask you for 36 grand, but can we have 5 grand to do this? Can we have 10 grand to do this? Can we effectively double the budget for societies? This year, 103 societies had approximately 6 grand between them to fund them. We could say to the university, okay, we're no longer affiliating with the NUS. We're not having this 36 grand because they wouldn't give it to us as free cash. But we could say, look, we want 6 grand for societies. There's lots of possibility with this by saying we don't want to be a part of the NUS.
How much does the union currently receive and was approved at the last AMM from the university, which is
in
public
total
figure? Yeah, do you have the figure?
I don't have our whole subvention.
Yeah.
It's around £1 million.
Okay, so that gives some context, obviously, to whether asking for more is something which is necessarily the way to go. It's a good point to raise. Would you like to select one of the other questions, if you can remember what they were?
I can't remember a different question.
Okay, Alan,
Sorry.
pick a question.
Just pick a
of all of them. You know, with that memory of yours.
Was there something about national representation? Do we need
Do we need to? Yes.
Do we need to be?
I apologise for the blank look.
No, I do as well. That's probably something we've already been asked. I think I'm going to move away from that. You've been trying to ask a question. I will come back over here in a second to people who haven't asked before. You just go ahead with your question, please.
Just to get back to the point of the union, which I think is about having our voices heard rather than getting discounts, arguably. So the students' union here has to work fairly closely with the university just to get a working relationship that can be continued over many years. That's just how it works. The consequence of that is that sometimes it can't be as critical as some students would like, whereas the NUS has the distance that it potentially can do that, whether it does or not, is that question. But do you think our union here can be critical and independent from the university? Sufficiently to become independent from the NUS?
Okay, interesting question. So that's to both, I assume, in both camps. So the question, in essence, correct me if I'm wrong, is can the University of Surrey Students' Union be independently critical enough without the support of the more proximity-based, removed NUS, which is in London and it's a national level and all this kind of thing? No. Can. Not no.
So, as you might know, or you should know, I hope you would, we had an operational review put upon us on the university recently. And you mentioned that we would perhaps need the NUS to help us be critical towards the university's actions. We asked them multiple times. We called them, we emailed them. They weren't not there to help us. They didn't reply. We needed their support as a union, and they weren't there to support us.
Can I?
I'm just going to go to yes. I will come back to that, but I just want to go to yes first, as this is fair.
As a quick response, that in fairness, I don't think that was right, but in fairness, that was in the middle of a general election, so in which there was a big campaign. That doesn't make it right, but that is something to bear in mind. In terms of the question, so
the NUS supposed to? Sorry, I know this. I'm being briefed that this is not supposed to be like question time. Is it? let me think that's phrase. Is it not right that the NUS is supposed to support students and students' unions, not political parties?
It is right, but I don't think there was much support in political parties at that time. The NUS held a massive campaign to get students to vote. That was one of their biggest campaigns.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, they held register to vote sessions. They held massive campaigns, so that was their main campaign.
Okay,
in
sure,
my view.
sure. Do you want to add something?
Just because I was involved in that campaign that you mentioned. If you asked the people that were running it, I think that where they thought more support should have come from is probably with our students' union here. We'd have liked support from the NUS, but you're right, we didn't get much.
What's your status on the campaign, just if you wouldn't mind sharing?
So this was a campaign to save jobs at the university. I ran the politics department, and I did that with a lot of other people. It wasn't just me.
Yeah. So you were part of the Save the Surrey 100
We
campaign.
asked for support from a lot of people. We got support from the union.
Yeah, sure. I'm not. You're not on camera or anything like that. On the spot. Just so we have context, you were part of the Save the Surrey 100 campaign, and your point of view as a representative of that collective is that the Students' Union could have been more supportive, is what you're saying, right?
Can I just say something?
No, not right now. So that's the point you're making. We don't have anyone here to represent the Students' Union, so we can't respond to that exact point.
The NUS does fight a wider campaign to stop cuts. So
Okay, sure. Thank you for that point. Would someone from the Students' Union like to respond to that, seeing as this is an open debate with opportunities to respond?
Asked us to do. That's part of the campaign. What did we not do?
I would not like this to turn into a debate between you two. I think that is for a different forum. Please rephrase that as a response or pass to someone who can and will.
We fulfilled everything that we were asked to do by the campaign. We also went above and beyond and offered things, but we weren't supposed to. Also, behind the scenes, we used a different campaign strategy too. You wanted a more visible campaign, which is fine. But we were sitting down in meetings left, right, and centre and talking to senior management, having the same discussions and supporting you.
Okay. No, please. Sorry, that's for a different discussion. Because you're desperate to speak, Maz. Keep it snappy. Yeah, please do.
The NUS discussion.
Yeah.
What we did with the NUS was we tweeted them, we tried emailing them, we left them voicemails. Just for context, we've got, we've spoken to the current vice presidents, they've apologised for that.
So the NUS has apologised for what?
For not responding to our calls.
For not responding to calls, emails, tweets in respect to the support for the quote-unquote Surrey 100 saving. Do you think the NUS could do more in the future now that they have acknowledged this? Do you think that it would be valuable for us to be members next year if something like this were to happen again or in the future?
Well, I think we just have to look at the past in order to tell us a bit about the future, in that, 21 years ago, Simon Francis, who's an events and trading officer, he had the same issues with the NUS that have been raised now. And then looking to the future, why is that going to suddenly change? Is my rhetorical question once again.
And my rhetorical-ish answer is more than 21 years ago, Jack Straw was president of the NUS and ended up having a fruitful career and saying that the NUS did a lot for that and for wider society. So I think there are people who would sing the praises of the NUS. There are also people, as there are with all these institutions, especially political institutions, who would not. So that was a response to the question. I don't know who to go. Someone who hasn't asked a question yet. So you first, and then you there, because neither of you have spoken yet. Yes, you can. Try and keep them short and snappy.
The Yes campaign is, what is your opinion on the NUS being seen as a stepping stone into the Labour Party leadership?
So what is your opinion on the NUS being seen? 2 seconds just for the microphone.
My question for the No campaign.
Okay, don't worry.
My question for the No campaign is, so when I was president of the Postgraduate Society, I was told postgraduates aren't being engaged with the union. So I got sat down with Matt and he said, that's great, that's brilliant. We'll try and sort these things out and we'll try and get you, and like, if you want these things to change, why don't you just try and change it from the inside? I thought, okay, that's something I don't really want to do now. My question for you guys is, why don't you want to change it from the inside? It seems that nothing is being done about it. Like you just say, we want to leave because it's rubbish, rather than trying to change it.
Okay, thank you. So the first question to the Yes campaign is, if I can remember,
Stepping stone.
To what extent is membership of the NUS and being a leader of the NUS and all this kind of thing a stepping stone into specifically the Labour Party? So we'll go with that question first.
Yeah. In terms of this, I think, in my opinion, that is more historic. And in the NUS's opinion, there have been recent speeches in which representatives have actually said this is a more historic thing. We are not Labour Party stooges. We are not trade unions. We are confederations of student unions. That was in a speech by the current Vice President in St Andrews. But I think there has been Labour candidates that have come from NUS leaders, that can't be denied. But I also think there is a slight faction between NUS and Labour nowadays. Slight. Because obviously Labour is slightly different to what it was 20 years ago. The state of the Labour Party is slightly different to what it was 20 years ago. And I don't think it's progressive to see the NUS as just a political thing, in my opinion. I don't think that's progressive. I think that does isolate people. And I think that just being sort of Labour and just being a stepping stone is not where it should go, and I don't think it's where it is at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And the question to you for the No campaign was why are you just saying NUS is rubbish, to use a direct quote from the question, and not trying to change it from the inside?
Okay, so that kind of links in with this politics and Labour argument to it. Now, if you speak to any of the SABs today or previous SABs, they will tell you that there's certain cliques within the NUS. When you go to a conference, there's a certain clique that has a lot of voting power, a lot of swaying power, and this kind of means some voices are heard louder than others. And also, with regards to trying to speak up louder, that makes it difficult. And the fact that our SABs team and our execs change every single year, you know, it takes someone with a passion for it, the drive for it, and a thick skin to be able to try and push forward our voice. But if we have people changing every year, they're going to have different priorities, different passion, different things they want to do. So that's kind of my answer to that.
Okay, the exec at the NUS changes every year or every 2 years as well. Is that not the same idea? Is this doesn't really seem to respond to the question about changing it from within? What do you want to change? Or is leaving the only option?
Well, in terms of the exec changing at the NUS, it seems that doesn't change the culture, because the culture has remained the same for, as you mentioned, well, as I mentioned, 21 years ago we had the same issues that we have now. Whereas when you come to the union, we have a small group of people who make a big impact. In the NUS, it's a big group of people, and that means culture's a lot harder to change with a large group.
Thank you. Can we have a couple of questions just from Twitter, just for everyone who's still engaging?
It's not really questions coming through.
It's not questions, rather statements. Keep commenting. We love comments. Read through those later, but if there are any questions, please do. It's just 7 o'clock, so we won't be going on for too much longer, but if there are lots of questions, then we'll have those answered. You haven't asked a question yet, just there. Yeah.
This is to the Yes campaign. You haven't responded to what the No campaign have said about, and also what I've read in the open letters about some of their conferences and some of the abhorrent things that have been said there by leaders of the conference. Regardless of how much it costs us and other kind of more intrinsic things that you've talked about, do we actually want to be part of something that is run from the inside in a way that we don't agree with?
Okay, thank you. So this question abhors the conference or the conferences, and is asking whether we want to actually be part of something that has this negative element surrounding it.
I think that is a big issue. There obviously you then have the element of how can it change and how much can you change that, because that's I'm not going to sit and say that's right, that's okay. But the other element is how much that is representative. I know some people who went to the Student Eats conference, which is a smaller conference, but about one of their campaigns of growing your food sustainably and stuff. And apparently That was a similar conference, and that was very well organised. There were no issues there. It was a really, really fruitful experience and a really good day. And it was a really good day. And I think that it's really important to see it in the wider picture. Obviously this year we didn't have representatives at the Women's Conference, and we didn't have representatives at LGBT. I can't say for sure about the Disabled Conference. But so we can't know as a complete representative picture, but I think there needs to be change, but I also think we need to be aware of what occurs on a wider scale.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from anyone who hasn't asked one yet? Yeah.
Given the amount of justification that you're having to do with things like the conferences, yes, there are problems, but we don't accept them and that kind of thing, is it worth our sticking around for the next how many years it's going to take them to change that? Even if they change that in 3 years, that's still coming up to £100,000 membership fees. So is it worth our sticking in the NUS to try and change that from the inside, which would have massive bureaucratic sort of convolutions, etc.? Or would it be worth our exiting, for which, and I'm not saying this is the best solution, just for context, and if I remember the AMM correctly, we could, I think, hire an entire 6th sabbatical officer to do everything that the NUS was doing for us. I'm not saying that's the best idea, but just for the kind of money we're playing with.
It depends what you think the NUS does and whether you think a sabbatical officer can do what.
Maybe starting, yes. But yeah, even if we don't know what it does, we could have an entire 6th SAB that does everything, and we don't know what that is.
Yeah, I'm not going to pose a question just because we had another referendum a year ago on changing the sabbatical officers we currently have. We're not going to be changing those sabbatical officers anytime soon. So, unless someone wants to propose that, please don't.
Respond to like what you said?
You can.
About you mentioned, is it worth sticking in the NUS when not in terms of the 6th sabbatical offer, but you could save money, sort of thing, and wait for the change is what I suppose you were trying to say.
Yeah.
In that sense, I think it is worth staying in the NUS. I think it is worth making change, and sort of the NUS defines itself as being for student unions, and I think it's really important to be part of that change. It was mentioned before that there is no change from the inside because of the cliques, because it's a big organisation. I think you could look to a lot of big movements in history and say that if you told them, there could have been a lot of things that are true now that weren't true then. There is a LGBT Stonewall stuff. That's a big organisation. They were fighting against a culture. And I think if you take the view that change can't happen, change is hard, I think you don't get anywhere, and you just leave it to other people who think the same thing, so you don't get anywhere.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a question for the No campaign, out of those who have their hands up? Okay, who hasn't asked a question yet? You haven't. You'll hand one up first, and I'll come back to you in a second. Yeah.
So I'm one of the members of Garden Soc who went to this Student Eats conference last week, and there was 2 of us that went. It was in Lancaster, and we met loads of other university garden groups, made lots of contacts, got a lot of useful information from people within the industry, and over the course of the year, our affiliation with the Student Eats group has been very valuable. They've given us loads of contact information. We're in the process of getting our own beehives, and they've helped us get risk assessments and things for that. We've also got preferential treatment when applying for certain grants. So my question would be, how would the Students' Union support societies in those kinds of activities if we're not part of the NUS?
So how would the Students' Union provide the support that at the moment some societies, according to this example here, are receiving from the NUS?
Well, that's an example of where the NUS is doing something right. But, sorry, what did you say? What was your question again?
The example of where the NUS is doing
the
something
Students' Union
right.
replace it?
Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of this subvention we get, if we're effectively saying we no longer need that 36 grand, as I mentioned earlier, could we have 6 grand instead and push that towards societies?
So basically, your response in a nutshell, not to sort of exhaust the pun on garden sock there, is, I don't know if you really have nuts and gardens, but anyway, is to ask the university for the money to to pay for what we wouldn't benefit from with the NUS. That's basically your response, is what you're saying.
Well, that's one route that you could take.
What's another route? And that is another pun. I'm sorry. Go on. Sorry.
Pushing the union harder. We have an annual fund that I believe you have access to.
So asking the university for money.
We're pushing up crowdfunding. That's asking people for money.
It's a good example.
Well, the university is people too, but it's
some say.
Yeah.
I'm not going to labour that point so much. We have a compelling question from Twitter, I'm told.
Somebody would like to know
I will
from the
come
Yes
back to you.
campaign, what do you dislike about the NUS? And from the No campaign, what do you like about it?
This is very adversarial, isn't it? Okay, what do you dislike about the NUS?
I think I've mentioned quite a lot through this that I don't think the NUS is perfect. I don't think the fact that that people have made comments that aren't is perfect. And I don't think the fact that it's cliquey and the fact that there is little change or little voice in certain circumstances is right, and I think that's what I dislike about it.
Okay, thank you. And what do you like about it?
I like the idea of it. I like the idea that there's a national platform for unions to be able to discuss their views. However, I just think it's a shame that seems to not be happening in a way that is relevant to Surrey students.
Okay. You're desperate to ask a question, I think, to know, so go for it.
I was wondering, hypothetically, were we to leave the NUS, how will you make sure that our own students' union remains accountable? Say, hypothetically, some students wouldn't agree with some of the actions that the sabbatical office were doing. How would we go about to change that, considering...
The Students' Union is not currently accountable to the NUS, so that is a moot question.
But as a student, you could go to the NUS, theoretically.
The NUS is not an appeal body in that sense, and there's no accountability mechanism between... The NUS is a membership, a union membership. It's not a higher authority of review. I'm not sure what you're saying.
It's the university.
It's the university is to whom the union is accountable. And yeah, the main accountability mechanism is the members,
the students,
via elections and debates like this and that kind of thing. So I don't mean to shoot you down too much, but that's the response regarding NUS. So I don't think that's a fair question. Yep.
Everyone keeps saying that we don't actually know what we gain from the NUS. Other than these conferences, what do you, to the Yes campaign, do you have anything concrete that we actually get from being in the NUS, like in terms of, obviously we have conferences that in a lot of cases we can't actually attend or people aren't probably aware of. Do we have anything that's actually concrete that we gain from it other than like £10,000 in trade and stuff
Okay.
like that?
Okay, so just sort of bullet points, if you have them, of what we might benefit from being members.
Okay. As I said at the beginning, we do gain. Obviously, we gain the conferences, but we gain the support of the campaigns. We gain sustainability. You gain NUS Connect, which you can theoretically connect with the entire student movement. You connect with your officers, and any student can do this. You can connect with what the NUS is doing, and there are also research which is like about the postgraduate funding, which is in-house, which we can gain from. As say, Hidden Marks was NUS that has led to the zero tolerance policy for sexual harassment at the union, based on that research. So I think we gain those resources, and again back to sustainability. I don't think it's just the money that we would lose. It's also, as they mentioned, they gain a lot of support and a lot of contacts, and you'd lose that support and you'd lose that help.
Can we have a question for the No campaign, please? That's the only one, I think. Yep.
Apart from, I think it was Southampton we mentioned, do we have any other precedent of what's it like to be to disaffiliate from the student union? Do we have any historical examples to look at of times where universities have chosen to disaffiliate from NUS, and whether that's been successful or not, and if that's
okay. So does the No campaign have any examples of unions which have disaffiliated and what the outcome was, what the experience was like?
So I can tell you all the unions that are disaffiliated. You've got Cardiff Met SU, Dundee, you've got Glasgow, you've got a second one in Glasgow, you've got Queen Margaret's, you've got Imperial College who disaffiliated in 2008, you've got Southampton, they did in 2002, and then you've got St Andrews. And they all seem to be getting on fine, is my answer to that.
Do you have anything more substantial?
More concrete? No. All I can tell you is that they're still successful unis.
Okay. If anyone from any of those universities or unions is watching or gets wind of this, please tweet #SurreyDecides.
Can I quickly respond?
Yep.
Southampton is the most historic because it was one of the first. It was 2002. So that's over 10 years. But it is notable that in that 12 years, they have had 3 referendums. All of them have lost, but there has been 3 referendums to try and get into the back to the NUS. So though it is the most historic, there's still accountability to how successful it is and how student opinion creates.
Okay. Anyone who hasn't asked, you haven't asked a question.
You just said, if I'm right, that the University of Dundee have disaffiliated. Is that correct?
Yes.
So the Telegraph puts them second in country for student satisfaction. So my question for the Yes campaign is, why wouldn't Surrey be able to achieve that by itself?
So why would Surrey not be able to achieve the very high student satisfaction according to the Telegraph league tables, while Dundee has, despite disaffiliation from the NUS?
Can I just point out, Dundee is Scottish, so their students don't pay fees. Just for a small point. So
but there are other Scottish universities.
Yeah, there are
right?
other Scottish universities in that, but as a point to satisfaction, they're not paying for their degree. They're not.
There's other Scottish ones which are affiliated with the NUS.
Yeah, but I mean they're not paying their tuition fees. So in terms of satisfaction, you've got that.
But they're higher than other Scottish universities.
Yeah, no, what I mean is, aside from that, you've got that point, yeah? Additionally,
we got that one.
Yes,
okay.
Thank you. Additionally, I think it is possible to have student satisfaction without the NUS. I don't think that's a complete impossibility, but I also think that in order to have a good satisfaction, you have to be representative. You have to have some sort of support there. And though you have got the example of Dundee, there are others that haven't got as such satisfaction. You said there are many other Scottish universities in that are lower. You've got Southampton, they've been disaffiliated for 12 years. They're not up there in student satisfaction.
Okay.
So I don't think that's a cohesive evidence for it.
Do you have a question? Yeah, go ahead.
So we've all kind of sat here, and I think from my perspective anyways, people from the No and the Yes campaign have both agreed that there are some issues with the NUS to just have different ways of dealing with those issues. My question is, if we are addressing the fact that we have these issues with the NUS, and we stay with the NUS, are we not just telling them that, we have these issues, but effectively we're not bothered whether or not the NUS is broken, we're still going to stay? And if we leave, is that not a stronger statement that we have issues and we've left, and we're not going to come back until we fix up your act? For example, since our last referendum on the NUS, we're still having the same issues in terms of representation, we're still having the same issues in terms of limiting participation. And when one of the, when Maz went to the Black Students Conference and had an issue and voiced it, was absolutely shut down on Twitter, wasn't even asked or welcomed his opinion. Not very, very few people. In fact, only one elected NUS officer actually contacted him and said, what do you mean by the statement? How can we change? How can we fix that? So clearly it's broken. They've acknowledged it's broken. If we stay in, are we not just telling them, no, it's broken, but...
So by staying in, are we not just acknowledging that there are faults but doing nothing about it, I think is the question. And then can I have a question for the No campaign afterwards?
Yeah. I don't think we are. I think that indicates that we are giving up representation, we are giving up support, we are giving up everything that the NUS does. We're putting a society at potential disadvantage. Gordon slided there, just for clarification, but in order to make a point, in order to sort of be the higher person. And I don't think that is necessarily a progressive thing for the good of sort of all the universities. I think what is much better is to band together. The original letter that did not get published in the Times had 60 unions signed onto it about the original General Conference. I think it's much better to band together with those unions and go to the NUS and say there are issues, instead of just leaving and making a point that will last, about 5 minutes, and then the NUS will forget about you.
Are there any more questions? If there are, if everyone can just show me your hand, then we'll go for a final round. Are you sure? You don't look so sure. Okay. We'll have a question from you, and then these 2 questions, and then unless there's something compelling on Twitter, that will be it. So that's the last 3 questions we're going to go for. So you've been waiting a long time for a question. So.
Okay. So if we leave, as much as I said, whether we leave or not, we can stay in and we can do nothing. We can leave and we can just ignore it, or we can try it whether we're in or out and actually change the NUS. So if we leave, do you think we should just do nothing and ignore the NUS, or do you think we should try and work with other unions that left and actually change the NUS, and how would you go about that?
Okay, sure. So if we were to leave, so this is the no camp, what would you suggest we do?
In order to change the NUS?
Yeah, if you think that's something we need to do, not as members.
So I think this comes down to 2 things. One thing is that it's already started in that people are starting to make noise about changing the NUS. Maz posted his open letter, if you like, or article about the conference he went to recently. But I also think we need to be careful in that if we focus too much on reforming the NUS, whether we remain in or out, we risk losing some of the focus on our students, and that risks us being less effective for our students, because the NUS isn't effective for our students directly. As in, what have they done for Surrey directly? Did they help us with the operational review? No. Things like that.
Okay. The final 2 questions, just you, and then I'll come to you.
So the NUS are heavily involved with our university green team. They drive a lot of their campaigns, student blackout, student switch off. What can the university or the union do to support environmental campaigns if we leave the NUS?
You're asking about the union, right? What can the union do? Again, that's probably better directed towards union. I'm not going to ask you to respond now, but you can speak privately about that. Do you think the union is able to support, I suppose, to be more general, is able to support these types of campaigns?
Yes, I do, because you mentioned the student switch off. Currently, the University of Surrey pay for that, not the union. And they don't pay with NUS discount, they pay double, which is the fee if you're not affiliated with the NUS.
It's not about the money, the question is about support. How would the union support sort of environmental issues that students might have if we're not affiliated with them?
So how would the union be able to support, environmental issues without the affiliation?
It's not all about money.
Sure, no, of course. What I meant by my point is that the University of Surrey currently supports those green initiatives in terms of campaigns. And in terms of the green campaigns within the union, that's a situation where you go to one of your sabbatical officers, you say, this is an issue I have, this is what I want to do, and they will help you. And that's happened. If you're part of the green initiative at the moment, which I think you are,
What is the green initiative?
well, the green campaigns.
We know what he means.
You know what I mean.
Come on.
Care about the environment.
You care about the environment, and if you need the help from the union is there to help you.
Sure. Thank you. Okay, you can respond to that, and then we have one final question, then we'll wrap up.
Make a really quick point. It did become clear to me through somebody in Garden Society that there is a potential route that, although the university currently pays double of the costs of those programmes, it is possible, because of the affiliation with the union, for the union to have a take out a grant so that they make up the other half that they could use for whatever they want. So that is one, if we're going to talk about money, that's a possible source of revenue. And 2, I think even the affiliation with the union, though it's through the university, does create support for the NUS and support for those things. Again, it gives priority to them, and which you might not otherwise have, and gives. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Final question.
This is just kind of to look at the general trend, like we were discussing earlier about universities have left the affiliation for NUS. Surely, if we continue, we could continue a precedent in that, other things could establish. And the question I want to ask to know is that, is it possible maybe further down the line that we could affiliate with the non-affiliated universities in a separate union? Is that even possible to do such a thing in the context of things?
So you're
And
proposing
what
perhaps...
extent would you go to affiliating or associating with other universities
Okay.
in some sort of group format?
Okay, so what steps would you take in order to affiliate, if you would like to, and that's what you're proposing? That's kind of a separate point, but it's an interesting one, with the disaffiliated unions and perhaps others who might disaffiliate as a result. It's a domino effect.
What steps would I take?
Yeah, if you think so. It's a leading question. What steps do you think should be taken?
Okay.
If any.
Well, I think it is doable. You get together with the other unions, you discuss with them, you form that non-NUS union, and you go from there. I mean, it's pretty simple.
We might need a catchier name, but yeah. So, do you think that's something you would encourage? Of course, you're not the only person; you're just a spokesperson for the campaign. To be fair to you,
but what, as I mentioned previously, I love the idea of the NUS, of what it's supposed to do, to be a national platform where unions can kind of get together, discuss their issues, and have effective representation, which is not what we're getting at the moment with the NUS. I do like the idea though, and I definitely think if that was an option and they could band together, then yes.
Thank you very much. Voting for this referendum will open tomorrow, and you'll be able to vote. Well, it'll have to now. I was told tomorrow, but voting will open tomorrow. Put me off my stride, and it will be via an online a link sent to you by Surrey 365, as always. Now, you're able to choose between yes or no. There's no wrong or anything here. It's just you just don't vote if you don't have an opinion. And hopefully we'll have a really good turnout. Thank you very much for tuning in to the final Surrey Decides of 2015, hopefully. And thank you everyone for coming and everyone for tuning in, and well done to Sue. Thank you very much. Cool. Make sure you vote. Well done. You did well. It's very pressurising on your own.
I'm better at writing some speeches.
Oh, it's very good. You both did very well. You both did really well. Now you're nice and prepared for it.
Yeah, it really is nice.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being nice.
No,
that's what I kind of like. But I just stumble over words. But that's what I need to work on. It's a good experience. And this wasn't even that intense. It's good practice.
If you can see, thank you very much. Drawing out.
This table.
But you'd have to go extra.